Hello world, my name is Shithij, this is the coding tree, and today we're talking about another data structure in Python, dictionaries. So far, we've talked about many different ways to represent data in Python. We've talked about one-dimensional and two-dimensional lists, we've talked about classes and how we can structure objects in classes, and we've talked about all of their practical applications. But there are still many other data types in Python and in other languages which are really beneficial and we have to learn as well. There's still more we can do, and there's still a lot we can't do with what we know so far. And that's why there are still so many different types of data structures that we haven't learned yet, but are really useful in the real world. So we're taking a look at one of them today, known as dictionaries. Let's say, as an example, to illustrate the shortcomings of lists and such, we had two lists, and all we wanted to do was represent a list and another list in a way that they are essentially related to each other. So list 1 will, let's say, contain the address of a house, and list 2 will contain the cost of the house. For the purposes of this example, let's say that the 0th index of list 1 is the address of house 1, and the 0th index of list 2 is the cost of house 1. And then the first index of the list 1 is equal to the address of the second house, and the first index of list 2 is equal to the cost of the second house. So basically, each index of both arrays stores key information of a particular house, and those arrays essentially work in correlation with one another. Obviously, if we wanted to represent our data in that way, we could do that. In fact, we can also use what we talked about last time, classes. We can make a class for houses, and with the two key attributes of the classes being the cost of the house and the address of the house. And that's a fine way of doing things. But at the end of the day, there are other ways to do it as well. And that's where dictionaries come in, which is really provide an efficient solution to the issue of having to store all of this information about the houses that we need to store. Here's what we essentially want to do. We want to create a way to store all of the information we need about a list of houses, but instead of using two lists or a class, we want to use only one data structure. How do we do that? Well, that's kind of what dictionaries are like. There are ways to store two pieces of data such that one can be accessed by the other. What do I mean by this? Well, let's say I had the address of a house and I knew the address of the house and I just wanted to get the cost of the house. With a dictionary storing all of that information, I'll be able to store the address, the cost of the house, essentially in the address of the house itself. So first, let me answer the question. What is a dictionary? Well, as I've mentioned, it's another data structure in Python, but it's actually really cool the way the data is represented in dictionaries. Because dictionaries are unlike a list because they are unindexed. Remember how in lists, if you called the index 0, if you did list name and then put in brackets and put 0 inside of the brackets, you would get the 0th, otherwise known as the first, element of that list. Well, the thing about dictionaries is that they don't have indices. All they are is simply what are known as key value pairs. A key is a word or a number, and a value is a word or a number that is associated with a key that it is placed next to. I'll show you what that means when we actually create a dictionary through code, but for now, just understand that key value pairs are the backbones of dictionaries. Note that the ultimate sacrifice of dictionaries is that they're basically meant to be read. They aren't meant to be iterated through or indexed simply because that's not what their purpose is. So now let's get into writing our own dictionary. And we do that kind of similarly to the way that we write arrays. So first, let me title a dictionary. I'll call it houses. and I'll set it equal to what are known as curly braces as opposed to the brackets we used in lists. So I can do that. I can set it to curly braces, and then I can create my key value pairs. So what I have to do, remember Python ignores white spacing for the most part. So for the purposes of this of readability and maintainability, we're going to separate each initial key value pair with a comma and an enter. So essentially each key value pair will be on its own line. Next is a symbol in Python, which will denote a separation between keys and values. So let me start by creating my first key value pair. I'll put in a random address and then a random cost, and I'll separate them with a comma, with a colon. After that, I'll put a comma so that the Python compiler knows that that is the end of that key value pair, and what I'm going to write after, but still inside of the curly braces, is going to be another key value pair. And I can populate the dictionary with 3 different key value pairs just for simplicity's sake, and separate each with colons, each key and value with colon, and each key value pair with commas. There. That's a dictionary that has been created. Now let's talk about the absolute coolest things about dictionaries. So remember how I said they're unindexed? Well, you may be wondering, how do we get their data if they are unindexed? Well, that's what I find really cool about key value pairs in dictionaries. You get the value by calling the key. What do I mean by this? Well, it's actually pretty similar to lists. So I can add a new line, and I can add, outside of the dictionary creation, I can add a print statement and a call to the first address. So what I'm essentially doing here is writing the name of my dictionary, houses, and then adding what we initially saw, the brackets that we see in lists. Because what we're doing here is essentially calling an index, but an index is designated by us and not 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc., which is designated by Python. We're creating the indexes. What does this mean? So I can get the cost of the house that is located at this address by simply calling that address in my dictionary. What that returns is the cost of the house itself, the value of the key. That's why key value pairs are so useful. If I just know what I'm trying to get, I can get that information about it. Of course, just like lists, dictionaries have their own other functionalities as well. Adding items to a list is actually really elegant. All you have to do is essentially create your own key value pair and assign that key to a value. So even though this address doesn't exist in my dictionary already, I'm setting that address to be a key and assigning it another value. I can also use this to update my dictionary in the exact same way by instead using an existing key. Additionally, if I wanted to remove an item, all I had to do is write the dictionary name, in my case houses, pop meaning it'll remove or pop that item outside of the dictionary, and then in the parentheses I write the key. And boom, that covers essentially all of the basic functionality that a dictionary needs. I can add items, I can remove them, and I can update them. Additionally, I'm going to link a plethora of other functionalities by W3 Schools that dictionaries have, which you can take a look into if you're interested. Okay, so what now? I can manage all of the data I need to using key value pairs and dictionaries, but what else is there? And are there any drawbacks of dictionaries? Well, yes to both of those questions. Well, first, let's say that for whatever iterating reason, I wanted to get all of the data of my current keys and just store all of the keys in their own separate array. I can do that by calling the keys function in dictionaries, which will just return all of the keys of the array, of the dictionary, and in array format. The same works for values. So, just another additional bit of functionality which will be really useful when keeping track of larger dictionaries. But what are the drawbacks of dictionaries? Well, one very important drawback is that there can't be any duplicate keys. So if a seller of a house, in my example, wanted to list the price of a house in two different ways, one is a buy it now and the other is a monthly lease, he can't really do that using a dictionary. Well, he can't easily do that with a dictionary because keys cannot repeat themselves. Sure, you can repeat values, but not keys. And that's really crucial because it kind of takes away a bit of functionality from dictionaries. However, they are still amazing resources, and most of the time, you're not going to need this additional functionality because you can just store, instead of storing a value as a normal value, you can store a list of values. So the seller of the house at this address can store his two different costs in a list or a tuple. And that would allow him to store his multiple pieces of data under one key. Overall, dictionaries are just extremely useful in us being able to store all of our data in a newer way. Because I can store keys and values as pairs, I can store more information in dictionaries by associating two different pieces of information with one another. That's all for now, folks. I hope you enjoyed and I hope you learned something. If you did, make sure to leave a like, and if you want to continue your computer science journey, make sure to subscribe. And with that, thanks for watching.